Welcome back to In Conversation With, the podcast series from the team behind the Global Cosmetics newsfeed. Today, we're focusing on sun care, a category that remains a core to beauty, but is becoming more structured and strategically driven in 2026. The market is set to reach $14.6 billion this year and is projected to grow to $22 billion by 2036. Growth is being shaped not by hype, but by disciplined portfolios, strong retail compliance, and reliable seasonal demand. SPF-led products continue to anchor the category, while areas like mineral sun care and after sun are creating targeted growth opportunities. So the question is, how do brands compete in a market where execution and consistency and compliance matter as much as innovation? That's what we're exploring today. I'm delighted to be joined by Jennifer O'Hara, Director of Technical Marketing and Commercialization at INOLEX, offering insights into ingredient strategy, performance, and supplier dynamics. Dr. Szalontay, founder of Libi and Daughters, bringing a brand and formulation-led perspective on innovations in sun care. And Maggie Feiser, founder of Source Beauty ESG, sharing expertise on sustainability, governance, and environmental accountability across the beauty value chain. Thank you for joining me. So let's start with consumer. We're seeing greater demand for reliability, compliance-led claims, and formats that fit seamlessly into everyday use, alongside growing interest in premium and specialist products. Jennifer, from an ingredients and supplier perspective, what are the key consumers-driven shifts shaping sun care in 2026? And what challenges and opportunities do they create for manufacturers and brands?
Thanks. So I agree on the point that I think people are looking for more premium and specialty experiences with cosmetics. And so we're innovating and we already have a base of technologies to make the base formulas better. One thing that we're running up against and that I ask of the industry and especially the brands and even some of the contract manufacturing and formulators is to help with more education. We find that even when we're talking to our customers, which includes the brands, even when we're speaking internally within our organization about sun care and the need for better sensory sunscreens, so then it applies easier and then people will use it more, we're still running up against the fact that consumers and brands are confused, especially in the United States. I think there's an opportunity for more education for consumers and for the brands to show that the dangers of the sun from a health and even from a aging perspective, like wrinkles, are much greater than the misinformed dangers of sunscreen and daily sun protection. On our end, what we end up doing is we spend one or two slides or a couple of minutes just talking about the importance of sun care. And I feel like that education just needs to propagate and reach the consumer more because I think people want to use safe sunscreens. They want to use things that are safe for themselves and even for their families and loved ones. But I think they don't know where to start. And so a lot of times start with saying, okay, it is highly regulated. We do have good technologies, but first of all, it's important that you use the sunscreen that is best for you, that you're going to want to apply. And then we're going to just help you create the best experience and the best performance from that.
And Dr. Ina, from a formulation and brand standpoint, how are these expectations influencing product design, positioning, and differentiation?
Thank you. Our patients are becoming more and more skin literate, thanks God. And they no longer are satisfied with SPF, just SPF 50 written on the label. And they want to understand how the product protects them, what else it does for the skin, what impact it has on their long-term skin health. And what do they want from the sun care, the consumers? First of all, they're moving from sun protection to skin longevity. It's a trend all over. They're linking ultraviolet exposure to aging, to pigmentation, to inflammations in the skin. They're looking for multifunctional formulas like tinted SPF, barrier repair, SPF with antioxidant formulations inside, together with the SPF itself, hydration and SPF. They need SPF that is water resistant, invisible, and comfortable to wear. And ingredients have to answer all these questions, right? Also, there's growing expectation of transparency and trust. Patients start to be willing to have clinically backed claims and not just marketing language. They do not ask for sunscreen anymore. They want sun strategy. Products that work in the office during, the run outside, after gym, post-treatment, for people who are prone to pigmentation with special needs, for people who do aggressive clinical procedures. So all that has to be in the jar. Texture is not negotiable anymore. They don't want this chalky, gray, greasy SPF anymore. These days are over. The ingredients have to be in elegant formulas that are part of the routine. Also, as we all know, people are now over-informed but under-guided. There are a lot of viral videos that they watch on social media, on TikTok, that have no truth behind them. And our challenge, as was said before, is to dispel confusion around, for example, mineral versus chemical SPFs. And the opportunity is for serious brands to lead with calm, transparent, and evidence-based education.
And Maggie, from an ESG and consumer trust perspective, how are expectations around transparency and responsibility influencing purchasing behavior in sun care?
That's such a good question. The conversation has already touched on so many incredible kind of consumer trends in terms of what consumers are asking for, what they understand about SPF, how are we using it? I want to reiterate that the best sunscreen is the one that you're going to use. And so I think this is where consumers are really struggling right now, not just with sustainability, but with SPF overall as a category, is how do we reconcile all of these kind of technical criteria that we want with a product that can deliver. And that is really difficult, especially in the US. SPFs are regulated. They're quite heavily regulated. We don't have access in the US market to the same catalog of filters that you might see for SPF in other countries. And so this really means that we're already quite limited. And then what we see is that consumers are asking for a similar level of transparency, but tailored to what are the specific concerns around SPF with regard to things like environmental sustainability. The big one that we've seen in the last couple of years is a demand for reef-safe sunscreen. And this has to do with the biodegradability of the product itself. Obviously, when you put sunscreen on, a lot of times you're getting in the water. And so there have been these conversations around how do we ensure that the product itself is not degrading marine ecosystems, is not harming coral reefs. The problem is that this is not a standardized or regulated definition. And there's been a lot of pushback, both from the scientific community and actually a lot of environmental groups, like Maui County in Hawaii, for example, has pushed back on these reef-safe claims. And so the brands that are making them are struggling with how do we create something that we don't feel like is harming marine ecosystems, but we're still able to make a claim that consumers can understand and can believe in. And I don't think we've really found the perfect answer for that. So this is one of the areas where I think the industry is still in flux, but it really has to do with how is the formulation put together? What are the use cases where we would expect a consumer to engage with the natural environment? So marine ecosystems are the primary one for a product like an SPF. And then how do we look at things like toxicity for the environment and biodegradability? This is very much a live issue. This is something that we're still exploring. So I feel like consumers really want to see brands talk about this. We're just still at a very early stage of brands having the right level of information and the right level of discourse to actually meet consumers where they want to be.
Innovation in sun care is increasingly focused on performance and consistency, testing alignment and formulation efficiency, rather than constant newness. Jennifer, what technical developments are having the biggest impact on the ingredient innovation and SPF performance today?
I love what was said earlier about things being evidence-based. And so luckily, since we're on the chassis ingredient side, that's the area that we can play in. We predict our customers are going to start using different combinations of UV filters, including more hybrid sunscreens with a mix of chemical and mineral sunscreens. So we're preparing for better sensory experiences, and we're preparing for more and better performance as well. We're lucky we're starting with ingredients that are better than silicones, better than microplastics, and also help make mineral sunscreens lighter. But now we're going to go turbo forced and look at even better and greener technologies that are going to amp up the performance with evidence-based technologies and water resistance testing, everything behind it. But we want to beef up the innovation in not just sun, but also daily wear formulas. We already have the base ingredients that are multifunctional for sensory and performance, and we can provide biodegradable water resistance that's comfortable to wear. But I think it's going to be important that INOLEX starts innovating it with different formulas to make it easier to apply sun protection that is going to be multifunctional, and it's also going to be easy to incorporate in busy lives. So we are looking at things like, okay, tinted moisturizer, but it needs to be multifunctional, help with barrier protection, and help provide these additional benefits so that people start using sunscreen on a daily basis.
And Dr. Innes, how are formulation advancement improving efficacy, usability, and consumer experience in sun care products?
We're entering a phase where sun care is no longer just about filters, it's about complete biological protection of the skin. Some of the most exciting developments include next generation of ultraviolet filters and encapsulation technologies that improve stability while reducing irritation. It's very important. For example, with our growing and booming of aesthetic industry, in my practice, there are more and more patients with damaged and compromised skin. As a result, there's a higher demand for non-irritating, fragrance-free, high-protection products. For example, we are in Libi and Daughters, we're using dark glass jars that don't need to have additional preservatives that protect the product from sun. Glass jars don't need additional preservatives to protect the formula against interaction with the plastic jar, things like that. Also, what is interesting, there's an integration of new DNA repair enzymes and advanced antioxidants that target damage at cellular level is incorporated. Also, AI is very coming up. It's very important. AI-driven formulations and testing that allow brands to better predict the success of the formula, right? So I believe, it's very interesting what's ahead.
And Maggie, how is innovation intersecting with sustainability, particularly ensuring products deliver both performance and environmental responsibility?
I love this question because this really gets to the back end of product formulation that so often we don't get to see as consumers. We kind of see this is the final product and this is how it affects the environment. And this is maybe how we recycle the package, or this is how the product might act in marine environments like we were talking about earlier. But I think where a lot of the innovation is actually on the ingredient development side. And what we're seeing is really tech forward companies on the ingredient and manufacturing side who are using things like AI, of course, but all sorts of new and innovative technologies to try to be more efficient in the manufacturing process, which generally tends to be more sustainable because we're being more conscious and aware of the amount of things like water that we're using, which I think tends to go really unrecognized in a lot of the discourse around sustainability, is just how energy and resource intensive it is to create ingredients, to test ingredients, to manufacture products. And so the brands that are really pushing on ingredient innovation are also dipping their toe in understanding the environmental impact of the back end processes. I think customers are also really asking for data-backed things like clinicals. They want to see performance. And this is really pushing brands to focus less on things like ingredient dusting, where you add in a tiny percentage of an ingredient because it sounds good, and really focus on what's going to work and what's going to deliver performance. And anytime that we see this focus on efficiency in a product formulation, there really does tend to be a little bit of an environmental savings as well, because you're not just adding in ingredients to add them. We're focusing on what is going to deliver, what is going to make this product perform the way it's supposed to perform, and let's not over-engineer the inky. And so incorporating these types of principles, we do see that there are some brands that are really exploring, how do we simplify? How do we create really beautiful products with the fewest ingredients possible so that we're not overly sensitizing the skin? We're not creating additional kind of external factors that might not sit as well with the consumer. And that type of efficiency can also give them a little bit of an environmental savings from the impact perspective in the manufacturing and production cycle. So love getting a little sneak peek into the back end, because I feel like as consumers, we're always just looking at the final product, and the brands that are exploring environmental impact from all stages are the ones that are really, I think, pushing the industry.
Environmental and regulatory scrutiny is intensifying, particularly around ingredient safety, food impact, and life cycle transparency. Jennifer, how are sustainability pressures influencing ingredient selection and supplier strategy?
Well, I think we're lucky that we already have a gentle, sustainable range of ingredients. And I think it's going to be important that we meet the compliance. I like what you said earlier about compliance matters as much as innovation. And so it is important for us to look at having a better impact of our tech forward ingredients, but it needs to be throughout the ingredient life cycle. So we are looking at life cycle analysis. We have run that on our ingredients and we're finding it's actually a positive impact. But we're also making sure with that positive impact that we're looking at a diverse feedstocks. So we want to simplify the labels with less is more and have multifunctional ingredients. But then we also want to have a variety of feedstocks so that we're not doing what I think happened to the palm industry where everyone was going palm. So we're looking at diverse feedstocks overall. And then we are looking to educate our customers and consumers about the importance of that. Because on our end, when we're partnering with different suppliers, we want to ensure that they're helping the farmers. They're even bringing us to the farms to hear their stories and hear how we can help. Like we learned that organic isn't necessarily better for the farmers because of the risk it forms for their families. Or if they want to go organic, they have unassurance of being able to support their families because it can take years without business. So we're doing work to make sure that we're partnering with the right people that are doing the right thing from the start, from the growth of the ingredient. And then we're looking at life cycle analysis to continuously improve our processes so that we're using less energy and that we're providing better products that when they go into the final product, it's not going to impact their carbon footprint because we just want to create the best technologies that are going to have good performance first. And oh, by the way, they're also going to have great sustainability behind it too with the technical backing.
And Dr. Ina, how do brands balance environmental considerations with the need to maintain high performance sun protection?
They choose the right ingredients. And it's very interesting. My patients start asking many questions last days, questions around it. Is the formula safe for the sea and ecosystem? Is the packaging recyclable? Is the product truly necessary? Or is it just another layer of a product which does nothing? And it's very good that these questions are raised in their heads. We see movements towards reef-conscious formulations, reducing recyclable packaging. More and more companies pay attention at that. Fewer but more effective products in the routines and less and more effective ingredients in the products. So less is more, but finally people start to talk about it. We see the opportunity to design products that are effective, safe, and respectful of both skin and the planet. In our case, when we designed the product, we made sure that it protects two environments, both the skin's own ecosystem and the natural ecosystem we interact with.
And Maggie, what role does ESG governance play in shaping credible, planet-positive sun care strategies?
It affects everything because the brands that are thinking, and I feel like I'm following on and echoing a lot of what was just said, but a lot of the brands that are thinking about any way you want to frame it, whether it's planet positive or it's environmentally sustainable, they're really responding to what the customers are asking them. So there's a lot of reasons to develop a sustainable business strategy, whether you're in sun care or any other category. Sometimes it's because it's good for business, and it typically does end up being good for business in a lot of different ways. Maybe it's part of the supply chain that you're trying to build. Maybe it's what your investors want to see. But most often, and probably most prominently, it's because we're responding to what the consumers are demanding. And I think what we all have seen is that consumers may not know how to ask the perfect question. They are getting more informed. They're still looking for more guidance. They're responding to the kind of information that they're being fed on social media and non-traditional media outlets, which can be very tricky for all of us to engage with. But they're still asking the question. And so I think trying to meet them where they're at, rather than penalizing them for, as a consumer, you're not really asking the correct technical version of what you're asking for. We don't get anywhere as an industry when we do that. And so understanding what consumers are asking for when they ask for reef safe, for example, or when they ask for sustainable packaging, we know that can mean a lot of different things. But where I think brands are now trying to move is, let me develop a credible, authentic way to build my brand positioning, my product, my formulation in a way where I can meet the consumer demand. Maybe it's not exactly what they're asking, but if I bring them into this narrative, if I show them the background validation, why I say my packaging is sustainably designed, why I think my formulation is not going to have negative effects on the environment, consumers really respond to that level of transparency. It's really that meeting in the middle. And so I think the brands that are doing this the right way are seeing that they're getting a lot. Yes, it's a lot of kind of upfront investment. You can't just build the product in the dark and then sell it, which I feel like was the way we did things for a long time. It requires this kind of step-by-step bringing the consumer into the journey, which does take a lot of time. But when you get there, the level of trust and repeat purchasing that you see from those consumers is incredibly high. And so as a longer-term business strategy, thinking about how you incorporate all of those elements into any kind of category, but especially in sun care, where people do tend to think of this as a really important part of their overall health, not just as skincare or beauty regime, but as a health measure. They're really looking for that level of trust, and they want to feel like they're buying from a brand that they believe in. And so even for brands that aren't necessarily sustainably positioned, having an element of credibility in that space can go a really long way to getting new consumers.
And sun care is one of the most regulated categories in beauty, and that complexity is increasing. Testing alignments, claim substantiation, and compliance readiness are now central to market access. Jennifer, how is regulatory alignment, particularly around SPF and UVA testing, influencing supplier selection and innovation pathways?
Well, I think right now on the ingredient side, we're actually getting ready for the US market, right? So the US market has a huge need for more sun care UV filters and more ingredients to use that have been used globally for years. So we're preparing for the new UV filter, the benmotrizinol, to get approved in June. And I think that's been a huge focus for everyone. That's where we're really going turbo for sun, because this new UV filter is going to allow stronger and safe protection for consumers. But we also know that it's already used in Europe. It's already used globally. But we think that we can make it better a little bit, the formulas themselves, and in an authentic way. But we're looking at how we can support the new innovations and still enable formulas that are going to perform well, meaning that they're stable and they're going to have high SPF that is also stable. You don't get any recrystallization or anything like that. But we also want to provide the delightful sensory experience. So we're looking at some multifunctional ways that we can do that with our emollients, with solubilizers, and with film formers. So we're looking at it across the board and figuring out, okay, how can we make this better so that it's a nice experience and that it gives the ability for customers to look at hybrid formats, or they can look at avobenzone and benmotrizinol together. We want to allow that opportunity to happen for formulators so they can create the safest and the best technologies out there. And so we're looking at how we can work with the base formula ingredients to make that happen.
And Dr. Ina, how do regulatory requirements shape product development, timelines, and portfolio decisions?
Regulation is becoming one of the most defining forces in sun care innovation, and we're seeing the increasing control on the ultraviolet filter safety and differences between regions. For example, what is approved in Europe may not work in the US, and it makes it more complicated. Stricter requirements around claims and testing. For brand, it creates both complexity and opportunity. Strong brands, for example, that invest in clinical data and transparent communication will stand out, but it also means higher costs for them and longer development time, which is a downside, obviously.
Yes, it is. And Maggie, how can brands ensure these claims and sustainability messaging remain credible and compliant across global markets?
That's a big one. I think brands need to really take seriously how they validate their claims. I'm not so much worried about how SPF brands validate their kind of performance and drug claims, because I feel like most brands that are really going in the market, they've been doing this for years. They have robust teams that are validating the performance data. We have clear regulatory guidelines, especially in the US, but also overseas, on what kinds of claims you can make, how to validate those claims. So the systems are already there. Where I think brands are struggling a little is they treat non-performance claims as like this whole separate ecosystem. So anything that has to do with sustainability, anything that has to do with a non-performance element of the product, they punt it over to marketing. And a lot of times marketing doesn't have the same systems for robust validation. And what I tend to encourage the brands that I work with to do is really build a kind of a universal claims validation system. And yes, the regulatory guidelines may vary depending on the type of claim, but the way that you validate the robustness of that claim and how you make sure you have the proper substantiation, that should not differ. You should always make sure that you're thinking critically, not just about what the claim is and how you validated it, but also how a consumer might perceive that claim. And maybe they can perceive it differently than how you intended. And especially in the United States, that can cause a really big litigation risk because we have, unlike a lot of other countries, we have a very, I'd say, healthy tradition of consumer class action lawsuits, which in some ways keeps brands honest, in some ways are a bit of a menace because there are plaintiffs' law firms that will just go after brands when they feel like there's been a misleading claim. And so brands will typically say, oh, no, but what we meant was this. And if the claim is misleading, a consumer has a justifiable basis to bring a class action lawsuit for a misleading claim. So it's really important for not just the marketing teams to be involved, but really have regulatory, have your business ops team, like bring all those stakeholders together and think critically around what the claim is, how you validated it, and how else it could be construed, especially when it comes to things like environmental sustainability and social impact, because I don't think brands have really cracked the code on how to make those claims clear and in a way that's been solidly validated. And you can open yourself up to probably more problems than you want. So really creating that robust universal system is going to help you make the claims that you want, but in a way where you feel like you can keep scaling and feel good about how you've built that marketing language.
And to close, I'd like to look ahead. Jennifer, what are your top 3 predictions for how sun care category will evolve in the coming years?
And my own inspiration, right? I think it's going to continue to improve in the 3 areas that we're always working on the ingredient side. And that's going to be sustainability, sensory, and performance. How can we increase all of that together? And then also, how can we make it fun and enjoyable for the end consumer, for the brands? So I see continued innovation in sensor. I see continued innovation to create new formats that are going to perform well, but also invite that delightful experience. My own personal inspiration right now, it actually hasn't even been created yet. So we're continuing to think of new ideas of new product forms that are going to be functional and provide the performance within the sensory. And so we had a future of sun care webinar at the end of last year. And from that webinar, the idea of having a unique product form like a shimmering body oil with SPF got me really excited. So it's a product that I could see myself using. I have teenage daughters, so I could see them using it. And even my friends, something that you can use for beach wear for long days in the sun. So it's something that I haven't seen yet in the market that's been done well. And I think we're going to work on that. And I'm trying to be patient to get that out. But I do see some more kind of product forms, but in the US, it still has to be product forms that fit the FDA monograph and the requirements. But I think there's still some areas that we can play just to make the experience of kind of base formulas, base lotions a little bit more playful and easier to use.
And Dr. Ines, what innovations or shift do you believe will most influence product development in sun care?
I see ahead 3 major directions in development of sun care. SPF will no longer be a standalone category. It will be integrated into skin longevity protocol. It will focus on not only preventing aging, but also on maintaining skin health. And the certain ingredients will be used to work together with sunscreen protection. Hybrid protection becomes a new norm. We will see more products combining ultraviolet filters with anti-aging, antioxidants and anti-aging ingredients, skin repair mechanisms, and offering multi-layered defense. Simplicity will be with purpose. Now, every single ingredient should be there for a purpose, right? Consumers will move towards fewer but more intelligent products and fewer but more intelligent ingredients and combination of ingredients. new formulations that are both effective and safe and environmentally responsible. So I think that this is the future of sun protection in 2026.
And Maggie, where do you see the biggest opportunities and the biggest risks for sun care brands as the category becomes more structured and compliance driven?
I feel like a lot of it for the US market especially is going to depend on the filters that we can get access to. We're so technically constrained because we don't have access to the same catalog of filters that we do in other countries. So I feel like we're a little behind in that space. But what really excites me is the ingredient innovation, is finding companies who are thinking about how they measure the impact of the ingredients that they're using, not just the filters, but all aspects of the formulation. Companies that are looking at things like life cycle assessments and how are we using water in our production and what is the heat that we're using, like really taking a 360 view of every stage of production and manufacturing and testing, because that's really where a lot of the impact happens. The end of life and the use phase of a product is a very granular point in time, but everything that comes before it is a huge spectrum of impact. And as companies start to scale and grow, the European market especially is really starting to take a solid view of you need to be measuring the impact of your products. You need to be understanding how to report the impact of your products. And so for brands that expect to go beyond just the US market or are getting so big in the US market that they need to be reporting that anyway, it's really going to behoove them to work with partners on the ingredient side and the manufacturing side who understand how to measure impact, how to get quantifiable data, so that as they're innovating, they actually have baselines to compare. They're not just innovating in a vacuum. And that, even without access to additional filters, that's going to really create a new narrative of how to produce these products that I think can really push the industry forward.
And with that, we'll wrap up today's episode of Predictive, Protective, Planet Positive Sun Care. A huge thank you to Jennifer, Dr. Ina, and Maggie for sharing their insights, and to you for listening. We have heard sun care in 2026 is being defined by precision, protection, and accountability. Success will be on strong fundamentals, from regulatory alignment and supplier reliability to clear product positioning and consistent performance. In a category where structure and discipline are becoming key competitive advantages, brands that can balance compliance, innovation, and consumer trust will be the best place to win. We'll be back next month with more insights as we continue to explore the focus shaping the future of cosmetic and personal care industry. Until then, take care, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode.